Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Great. Couple key things. The room is very large, and obviously this is a very intimate and tough topic. So if we could all just come closer to the middle to be together, that way we can do this all together, and it'll just make it much easier for the panelists to just speak to everyone directly, if everyone can just scoot in. A couple other key things. During this panel, we are securing this part of the, hotel. So if you need to leave for any reason, please go toward the escalators if you need to use the restrooms or for anything else. Thank you so much for your flexibility. Otherwise, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Julie Platt, the chair and the board of JF&A's Board of Trustees. Thank you, Julie, so much for being here.
So I'll start my formal introduction in a second, but it occurs to me that I just want to share something with you. If you look at a Torah scroll and the writing of the Shema, there are two letters that are elevated, the Ayin and the Daled, which are Hebrew for witness. And I've always thought about this since October 7th, and being in Israel, and I'm sure many of you have been in Israel or are planning to go to Israel. As much as the Shema is our sacred call to action, so is bearing witness. And by being in this room, which I do not think is easy, you are making the decision to bear witness. So I just want to express my appreciation to you for coming to this session and being part of this conversation. Okay. Today we are here to empathize and empower. When preparing for this session, one of the lovely panelists said something that embodies the goal of this session. She said, preaching to the choir is important because otherwise the choir will not know what to sing. I want to recognize that some of the audience members may have themselves experienced violence. Please note that all of us come to this session with the utmost sensitivity and with the goal of creating a better world for all of us. Our session will begin with an abbreviated version of Sheryl Sandberg's film, Screams Before Silence, followed by a panel of experts to unpack and expand upon the heavy topics that are highlighted in this documentary, including but not limited to the power of narrative and storytelling, how sharing survivor stories can empower communities, foster healing, raise awareness, and drive change. Breaking the silence, the lack of response from human and women's rights organizations regarding the sexual violence committed on October 7th. Advocacy in the face of violence and on a global stage. Initiatives dedicated to supporting victims and advocating for justice and the efforts of Israeli and Jewish organizations to raise awareness and promote action following the October 7th attacks on the geopolitical stage, including the UN. Ultimately, we aim to equip you with the tools to empower our community to speak up about the use of sexual violence as a form of terrorism. Before we turn our attention to the screen, I want to note that this session's content may be graphic in nature and may be distressing. The footage is heavy, and if you need to take a break, please use the exit behind you and take care of yourself.
Bodies were naked, totally.
We saw that some of it was sexual in nature, directly targeted sexual violence.
I heard a girl scream and ask asked for them to stop.
Her face was on the ground and she was raped.
He's dragging her by the hair, and she's handcuffed behind her back, and she looks terrified, and her pants are blood-stained.
She was naked from the waist down, bruises all over her body.
כשרותה בנות, כולם היו ערומות, מישהו הפשיט אותם, מישהו התעלל בהן שם.
They were using sexual violence as a tool of war, of weaponizing women.
They were sent with clear instructions to rape as many, to humiliate as many.
We are ready for the unthinkable possibility of pregnancies.
פשוט הגוף שלך הוא פתוח לכלל. יכולים להעיר אותך באמצע הלילה ולאנוס אותך, וכל הזמן האקדח מכוון לראש.
That was the first thing I feared. Being raped. Being sexually assaulted.
I remember the entire time I was like thinking, okay, you knew it's gonna happen.
It's really happening. It's really difficult to talk about. But it's my calling. It's my duty to come out and talk.
התעוררנו לצבע אדום, אזעקה, כי היו טילים ב-6:28 בבוקר, ורצנו לממ"ד, למרחב המוגן. אחותי הגדולה ים, האחים הקטנים שלי ואבא ואימא שלי.
ואז אנחנו שומעים צעקות, אל יהוד, אל יהוד, כאילו הם כאן, הם בבית שלנו. הם מתחילים להוציא אותנו בשיירה.
ים, ואז אני, ואז אימא. גל וטל יוצאים, ים באה לצאת והיא מתעלפת ונתקעת בדלת. ואני משכיבה את ים פה, ואנחנו מנסות להעיר אותה. והיא מגיבה לי קצת, היא מתעוררת, והיא מתעוררת כזה, פותחת את העיניים, והיא עוד פעם... והיא מתעלפת שוב, וגם זה הרגע שמישהו מהם מושך לי בשיער, ואז אני זוכרת שפשוט יצאתי. גם אמא יצאה, ואז היא חזרה והיא ראתה שים ירויה בפנים. והיא הייתה אמורה לבוא איתנו. הוציאו אותה, כאילו היינו אמורים להיחטף כולנו גם עם ים. אבא כבר נרצח, אבל ים הייתה אמורה לבוא איתנו והיא התעלפה, ואני מדמיינת איזושהי סיטואציה שהיא מתעלפת ואני ואמא בחוץ והיא פה לבד והיא מתחילה להתעורר והמחבל פשוט בא ויורה לה בפנים. הכל קרה, ב-11:40 זאת ההודעה האחרונה של ים, וב-11:51 כבר יש סרטון שלנו באוטו, חוצים את הגדר לעזה. הסתכלתי עליו ואמרתי לאמא, הולכים לאנוס אותי עכשיו, כאילו הולכים לענות אותי, אבל היא הסתכלה עליי ולא ענתה. כאילו קיבלנו את זה, שזה הולך לקרות עכשיו, שאנחנו פה עכשיו.
There were 10 men around me. And my instinct was just to fight, to do what I can. I didn't mind getting killed. I think maybe I preferred that in those moments. I was scared. I was really scared that they're gonna rape me there and that they're gonna drag me through Gaza streets and parade my body around. So I feared that more than being killed.
First thing you see is the terrorist drags Naama out, and her face looks terrified. She's barefoot and in her pajamas, and they're blood-stained.
They're grabbing her by the hair and she's all like messed up and
I'm thinking of her hair, and I'm like in my mind, I'm stroking her hair like I'm always doing, and I'm thinking
of what she experienced, you know, until that point.
we would like to think that this couldn't be possible, that nobody would harm a young girl. But then you just see it there. They're the one who posted that video, the Hamas.
אנחנו נמצאים פה בציר 232. כל הכביש הזה מלא ברכבים, חלקם שרופים וחלקם לא שרופים, אנשים ללא רוח חיים צעירים שרצחו אותם בדם קר על ידי ירי. אירוע קשה מאוד, כל מקום שאנחנו הולכים, יש גופות על הכביש, יש גופות בכל פינה, בכל מקום. הצורך שלא יתואר.
משטרה, צה"ל! יש פצועים! מישהו! יש לי פה הרוגים! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 הרוגים! יש לי פה שוטרת, יש לי שוטרת הרוגה פה! יש בפנים! אוי, 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 אוי. יש פה מישהו עם סימן חיים, שייתן לנו סימן חיים. If even one would raise his hand. שום סימן חיים? מישהו, בבקשה. מישהו יכול לענות?
מה שראיתי שם זה לא ישכח לי בחיים. זה הטבח נוראי. כנראה באיזשהו שלב גם הם ברחו. רדפו אחריהם ויראו להם באמצע החולשה.
We are trained to collect hearts or even bodies in hard situations. Now, we go around the world to help. Hundreds of bodies I dealt with. I don't have words to explain what we saw. Everything was ripped. A lot of the bodies were naked, totally.
In your experience, how often have you found naked bodies?
Never. Never.
מה שראיתי שם זה דברים שלא אנושיים. אם זה גופות של בחורות שהבגדים שלהם קרועים, איזושהי פוזיציה, את יודעת, שהיא שוכבת על הגב ורגליים פתוחות. היה גם איזה אחת שאת רואה ממש על פגה של אוטו, מכופפת עם מכנס למטה. אתה רואה גופה של בחורה עם בגדים קרועים ועם איברים כרותים כאילו. אז אתה אומר לעצמך, מה, גם אנסו אותה וגם שחטו אותה וגם ביטרו אותה, מה עוד יכולים לעשות לבן אדם כאילו?
Her face was on the ground, and when I turned the body up to the other side, the shirt was down, and her tights, that she wore tights, was all covered blood. I believe in 100% she was raped.
Why do you believe she was raped?
The bullet was in the neck. So why there is blood and why the shirt is off?
We came to a house. found her body. And she had nails around her female organs. Not only nails, but different plastic, metal things. She's a woman that's so you can do whatever you want.
כל עץ ועץ פה ראיתי בחורות קשורות, עם הידיים פות. מישהו רצח אותם, אנס אותם, תעלל בהם, פה בעצים האלה. הרגליים שלהם היו פתוחות. מישהו הפשיד אותם, מישהו אנס אותם. החדירו לעברים הפנימיים שלהם כל מיני דברים, כמו קרשים, כמו ברזלים. מעל 30 בנות נרצחו ונאנסו פה. הייתי צריך לסגור את הרגליים שלהם, לכסות את הגופות שלהם, שאף אחד לא יראה מה שאני ראיתי, אף אחד. אף אחד לא יכול לראות דברים כאלה.
If it's okay, I'd like to see some of what you saw.
אנחנו רואים כאן בתמונה אישה שקרעו לה את המכנסיים, ירו בה במפסעה.
As you can see, the body was brutal in different stages. This is a part of the breast.
זו אישה שירו לה כאן, זאת אישה שירו לה כאן.
Over here, and over here, and over here.
זאת בחורה שהיא הייתה ערומה, הרימו לה חצאית, הייתה עד למעלה והיא בלי תחתונים, פגעו בה.
And what is that there?
That's one foot, that's the other foot.
מכנסיים ותחתונים היו למטה.
This is the body with the nails and the parts. When we get closer and closer, you can see the nails.
Oh my God.
אין שתי אופציות של מה שהם עשו.
This is a piece of metal stuck there.
אנחנו מצאנו אותה עם מכנסיים ותחתונים למטה.
This is not connected to the body.
זאת אישה שלקחו סכין ותקעו מלמטה, שחו החוצה.
Oh my God.
I was at the Shura base, which is where all the victims of the October 7th massacre were brought. We realized that women were not just murdered. Women were shot in the head so many times that it seemed like there was an intention, an objective, to obliterate their faces. And we began to see that some of it was sexual in nature, directly targeted sexual violence. Some came in with no clothing and mostly very bloody underwear.
Did this feel systematic to you?
Yes, it did seem systematic to use sexual violence as a weapon of war, a deliberate genital mutilation of this specific population of women.
הוא מושך לה בשיער, היה לה שיער ארוך, הוא מושך לה בשיער, ובעצם אני מבינה שהוא אנס אותה. הוא בעצם משנע אותה. כאילו, ממש אני זוכרת את התמונה הזאת. ואז מעבירים אותה לעוד מישהו, והוא חותך לה את השד. הוא חותך לה את השד, הוא זורק את זה על הכביש, הם משחקים עם זה.
הם תפסו שם איזה בחורה, ואחד מהם כאילו אנס אותה. אני זוכר שהמכנס שלה היה למטה, כזה עד החצי, והוא מאחוריה. שוהם שהיה לידי, הוא אמר כזה, הוא דוקר אותה, הוא שוחט אותה, משהו כזה, ואני לא רציתי להסתכל. וכשחזרתי חזרה, כשהסתכלתי עוד פעם, היא כבר הייתה מתה, היא לא... הוא עדיין המשיך בזה. הוא אנס אותה גם אחרי שהוא שחט אותה. זאת אומרת, יכול להיות שהוא אנס אותה כשהייתה מתה. הם עשו מה שהם רוצים. הם עשו פשוט מה שהם רוצים, הם לא... לא היה חוקים.
دخل أول دار بعدين دار كانت المرأة.
بنت يمكن عمرها كانت 18 سنة وكان أنا 21 سنة.
حطيتها رميتها على الكنبة وأخذتها هيك نيمتها وشزحت العين وعملت اللي عملت. نمت معها. اغتصبتها.
Why? Why would the Hamas terrorists put sexual violence as part of their remit for this attack?
Using sexual violence as a tool of war of weaponizing women, sadly as old as the history of humanity. Because when the body of the woman is violated, it symbolizes the body of the whole nation.
While I was in Gaza, I was chained for 3 weeks. I was kept in a really dark room without being able to move. His name was Muhammad. He used to sit on the bed in front of me, wearing his shorts, laying down. I remember I couldn't look at him. I was just like looking away and covering myself with the blanket so I won't have to look at him. It made me feel really uncomfortable. He also kept asking me, do I like sex? Do I have sex with my boyfriend? And whenever he talked about it, I just like giggled and say, oh, come on, stop, trying to change the subject. I knew that he's up to something. I knew that something bad is gonna happen. So one day, Muhammad came and gave me women's sanitary pads. He said, dam, when you get your period, after that, you'll take a shower and you'll wash your clothes. And he kept repeating that every couple of times a day. And the period was just for one day, but I fooled him to think that the period is continuing. So I remember going to the toilet, folding the pads really tight so he won't see that there's no blood. So I did it for about a week until I could not lie anymore. He untied me and took me to the kitchen and showed me a pot sitting on the stove. I remember thinking, now is the moment. Something, what you thought about is gonna happen. I bent down in the bathtub like this so I could cover myself up, taking the warm water from the pot and put it in over my head. And then I remember I turned around. He was standing with his gun and the gun was pointed out at me. And he was huffing and breathing heavily, and he had a face like a monster, like a beast, like this. So I stood up and held a blanket, the small blanket, to cover myself. And he came towards me and just pointed the gun really hard at my forehead, screaming at me, take it off, and punching me until I could not hold the towel anymore. And he started touching me, and I resisted. And then he dragged me to the bedroom. And then he forced me to commit a sexual act on him. And I remember the entire time I was thinking, okay, you can handle this. You just want to survive. You need to survive. Your mom, your family is waiting. I just concentrated on that instead of what's really going on. And when he was finished, he went to clean himself up. I got dressed, covered myself up, and I was crying. He came in and he told me, I'm good, Amit, right? I'm good? No, I'm no good. No, I'm good. I'm your friend, right? I remember I could not look at him. I looked away. And then he got really mad. He closed the door, and I was in that room in complete darkness. Then he came in again and asked me, food? I'm good, right? I'm good. Food? And I realized that if I say no, he's gonna punish me again. So I said, yeah, food. And that's the worst part. That I'm completely dependent on him, completely dependent on the guy who just forced me to do what he forced me to do.
Of the girls you met, the hostages, how many experienced these sexual advances?
כמעט, חצי מהן. חוו התעללות מינית והתעללות פיזית, ועדיין נמצאות שם ועדיין חיות עם האונס שלהן.
We are ready for the unthinkable possibility of pregnancies and for needing to provide help in very, very difficult decisions that they and their loved ones would be facing when they come back.
I want to shout and talk to the world and let them know what's going on there. If I can help someone, if I can help the people who are still there, I want to. I feel like it's my calling to do so.
When I'm scared of myself, I can't make a sound. And if I'm trying to talk, my head meets the ground. I'm laying right there, chained and unarmed.
Just trying to give you a minute. It takes longer than a minute. It's a really tough film, and yet I am incredibly glad it was made. Those are two things that we have to hold. Really hard to watch, and I thank you all for watching, and really grateful that it was made. It's hard to not feel overwhelmed by this conversation about gender-based violence, especially in conflict settings, and the silence that so often surrounds these experiences. But as difficult as it is to watch, it's essential that we confront this reality so we can ask ourselves, what can we do to make a real difference? The film brings to light the ways in which violence against women is not just a conflict-related tragedy, but a societal one. The silencing of women's voices and the marginalization of their suffering are issues that require all of us to speak up, advocate for change, and stand in solidarity with survivors. It's this call to action that I'm hoping we can reflect on as we move into our discussion. We're fortunate to have an extraordinary panel with us today, people who have dedicated their lives to addressing these issues head on and who are doing the hard work of pushing for change. I'm really glad that we will get to hear their thoughts on how we can not only advocate for women's safety, but also build a more just and compassionate world for all women. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our amazing panelists. Ayala Razin Beit Or is a prominent advocate for women's rights and a specialist in combating gender-based violence. With a background in law and criminology, she has led initiatives at the Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel and served as director of the Authority for the Advancement of the Status of Women, focusing on legislation for gender equality and the rights of survivors. Currently, she heads the DINA project, advocating against war crimes and emphasizing the urgent need for global recognition of sexual violence in conflict situations. Sheila Katz is the CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, a Jewish feminist civil rights organization dedicated to advocating for the equity and safety of women, children, and families. With over a decade of experience in education and serving herself as a rape crisis counselor on college campuses through Hillel International, Sheila empowers Jewish women and allies to drive social change, focusing on those most impacted by injustice. Lee Yaron is an award-winning journalist with Haaretz, recognized for her investigative reporting that has shaped Israeli policy. Her latest book, 10/7, 100 Human Stories, highlights untold stories of women affected by the October 7 attacks, many of whom are not Jewish. Yaron's work offers vital insights into the human impact of conflict and has earned critical acclaim as a significant resource. Please join me in welcoming our brave panelists. All settled?
All settled.
Okay. Sheila, I'm going to start with you. In the initial days following October 7th, many friends and community partners that we worked with to tackle other human and civil rights issues remained silent. Can you talk about how you approached these conversations?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's good to be here with everyone. So can you all hear me okay?
There you go, that's better.
It's good to be here with everyone. It's really important. Jewish Federations for North America has brought us together in, difficult times to be with one another. It is hard to watch that film. For those of you who are seeing it for the first time, I know that could be really difficult to hold. And I just want to acknowledge how beautifully Julie opened this session and just first say, particularly as somebody who's been a rape crisis counselor, that sometimes we forget when talking about something over there, that it's actually also here. And so an acknowledgement that in this country, in the United States, 20% of women are sexual assault survivors, at least, right? This is one of the most underreported crimes. And so it's important that we acknowledge one in five at a minimum in our country. This is a health epidemic when you really think about it, a statistic that hasn't changed in over 30 years, disproportionately happening on our college campuses. There's so much to say about it, and I just want you to know, as we're talking about what happened in Israel, we'll talk a little bit about here. I'm holding the stories of people here, your experiences, you're seen, you're heard, you're believed. And let me also just acknowledge my amazing colleagues, both from NCJW here, but I see Meredith Jacobs from Jewish Women International, who's running an amazing campaign right now, and I see Elizabeth Cullen from Hadassah, NCW, Hadassah, JWI. We're in this together, women standing with women, believing women. We gotta do it together. So in response to your question, Julie, the voices we expected to speak up the loudest fell into the loudest silence we could have ever imagined. And it was really painful, particularly painful for those of us who were in those spaces. It's important to hold that. I heard a lot of people who never engaged in the feminist community at all talking about how painful it was for them. And I was like, it's hard for everyone. And for those particularly working in the feminist community and women's spaces, particularly for Jewish women who sometimes work in these organizations, it was awful. We felt abandoned, we felt gaslit, and I can say very clearly, because this isn't like a nuanced thing, that you're not a feminist if you claim rape as resistance. Period. Full stop. Rape is a violation against humanity. That's what it is. And so here's the things I'm going to offer, two things. One is a quick story from before October 7th that I've been holding on to, and two is what it means as we move forward with these groups, right? So before October 7th, some people remember that National Council of Jewish Women was called out by a local DC climate organization that wanted to kick us out of a voting rights coalition because we're Zionist. It made some national news headways. It was an interesting thing because we weren't getting kicked out of the coalition because we ran the coalition. So we were just like, it didn't have any basis on what was going to happen, but it was an interesting moment where they made this claim. We were in a coalition with 200 civil rights organizations, and we watched as nearly no one spoke out about it. Now, they weren't trying to kick out the Christian Zionist organizations, just the Jewish ones. And I found it deeply concerning. So we started this journey at NCJW to meet with all the organizations that said nothing in that moment. This was a few years ago, to say, did you notice this? What happened? Why did you say nothing, right? And what we learned, that I don't want to make any excuses for, was how scared people were to engage on the topic of Israel at all on the internet and interwebs, and that they were worried about what would come after them. And we had to talk about flexing this muscle and understanding that this was about kicking out Jews. This was a part of our identity, and they needed to understand how Zionism fits in to Judaism in a lot of these spaces. But there was one conversation in particular that I'm taking with me that I want to share, because I see a lot of activists in the room, and maybe it's helpful for you too. When I met with the Drum Major Institute, run by Martin Luther King III, my dear friend, and Andrea King, when I was sitting down with them about what could have been said more, what could we have done, he said to me, and I'm anyone who knows, I can't just call him Martin, so I'm always like Martin Luther King III. Anybody who knows him knows he looks exactly like his dad, right? You can't mistake him. And so he said to me, with love, Sheila, anytime I go into progressive spaces, I experience racism. I still experience racism. He says, because racism has permeated every single aspect of our country. And he goes, and you know what else has permeated? Anti-Semitism. He said, it is everywhere. And my advice as you're navigating this is to have your eyes open, that when you go into the space, it's already there. Don't be surprised by it. Be there with the intent to take it down. Understand that it's not a distraction from your work to combat anti-Semitism. It's not a distraction to your work, it is the work. And we have to do it together. And so actually with that reframe, I've been able to learn about a lot of instances on the left and all the spaces I'm in that have been bad for lots of people, and to talk about how we actually show up in solidarity together, what we do better. And here's the only positive thing I can say. We're not there yet, everyone. Let's just be real if you're in the feminist spaces. But I will say, every major women's national organization in this country has now taken out a statement condemning the sexual violence since October 7th. We don't talk about it enough. It's not always the best statements. They're not perfect, but it is a step in the right direction.
Say that sentence again. Every
major national women's organization in this country has taken out a statement.
No Jewish in that sentence. Every national organization.
Yeah, all the Jewish ones, we did that right away. We were on it.
No, I'm just making sure.
Yeah, I mean,
that
Planned Parenthood, and I'll say, maybe you'll ask about the UN event that we did, but we did a pretty big event at one point in time at the United Nations that we were at together, and we invited feminist groups to come, and we said to them, listen, we're inviting you to come to hear the stories of the women who had been silenced. We're not going to call you out from the stage. We're not going to call you out for your silence from the stage. We want you to come and listen. We won't tell anyone you're there. We want you to come listen. This was December 4th, so a little after October 7th. We had a ton of folks there. Planned Parenthood was there, NARAL, Reproductive Freedom for All, formerly NARAL, RAIN. Every group that came took out a statement within 48 hours of that event. And it shows that there's a both and to organizing. We got to call out when we feel betrayed like that. We got to name it and say it, because we can't just pretend it's not bad and hurtful, and people need us to stand up and have that moral voice. We also have to invite people in to get on the path. It's hard to know the balance. And I'll just say to everyone in this room, there's a few places I'm showing up at in the next few weeks, my staff knows, that are unexpected spaces. I think people are gonna be upset, that I'm at certain places with certain speakers and certain things, but sometimes you show up there proudly as a Jew. For me, I'm gonna show up as a proud Jewish, feminist, Zionist change maker, and people can kick me out if they want, but I'm showing up and taking my seat at the table. And as I like to remind folks in organizing, I get paid to do this. So I don't expect every single Jewish person and Jewish feminist to show up in these spaces if it's hurting you. You don't have to put your life mask on, but like we're here, the Jewish women's organizations and federations and all of us together to say that we are going to fight for our seat at the table and to make sure it's better for women in the United States and in Israel, and to make sure our wonderful Israeli counterparts that we love and value because we are family know that in the United States we are advocating for them and speaking up for them, because Hamas silenced most of the victims on October 7th. They have no voice. And that's why we have to speak up louder.
We're lucky to have you, Sheila, honestly.
Julie.
And that UN, I'm sure you all were very aware when that happened, the power of Sheila and Cheryl in partnership.
And Julie connected Sheryl Sandberg and I, and we made this happen together.
It's all good. So thank God that happened. Okay, I have 100 more questions, but I'm going to move to Ayelet for a moment. Ayelet, what are the current legal challenges facing victims of sexual violence and their families? And how can domestic and international advocacy help address these issues?
Okay, so I'll say in first year law school, like the first lesson you learn is how to approach a legal situation. And it's naming, blaming, and claiming. And since I'm a lawyer, that's how I pursued this matter. So naming, right? This happened, October 7th. We start getting these rumors, a bit of footage about what's going on, total chaos. We don't understand what's happening. I was on vacation with my family, and I started getting, because of my prior positions, I started getting reached out about asking, did this really happen? We understand there's mutilation, there's rapes, is this happening? And I'm abroad, and I say, guys, enough is happening, let's not amplify the fake. It's, I couldn't believe. I just literally couldn't believe. And I started making phone calls to the hospitals, to rape crisis centers, starting to figure out what is happening. And ever since, this is what I've been doing. And it happened. And we never experienced anything like this in Israel. Certainly not so systematically, not so widely, happening so widely. And you have to understand, what is this? And when you start learning this, you understand it has a name: conflict-related sexual violence. Mm-hmm. Sexualized terror. And the terrorists knew this. This is what they came to do, to terrorize us all. We didn't know. So that's that was the part of just understanding what happened, that it happened, and giving it a name. And then when civil society, how always civil society understands things first and then brings government after them. We started advocating for this, telling hospitals, you should be aware that you might be treating people who underwent sexual assaults. The police were investigating, the prosecution, and also the media. We had long conversation with the media. At the beginning, they would tell, there would be articles about the atrocities that happened, and then in bold it would say there were also sexual assault, but they're too horrific to put in writing. And then, and this is connected, I feel like it's connected to what Sheila said, what kind of message does that bring out to the victim, to the survivors, that, decapitating people and I'm sorry, this is the panel, you were going into this. Burning families alive is worse than raping? Are we not speaking about what happened? So we had this whole process with the media. This is the naming. So after naming, there's blaming. Who are we blaming for this? There were 3 waves of the terror attack. There were the Nukhbas, the elite unit. There were the armed forces that were like less trained or less elite. And then there was the mob, the civilians that just came in on, realized what an opportunity this is to do all sorts of stuff. Who are we blaming? Who was a part of this? You heard if you've seen the whole movie or you heard testimonies, there's testimonies of all kinds of people involved in this. The commanders of Hamas, and it's really important to understand, when you see the same MO in 4 different locations, and this was also recognized in UN reports, this is not only Israel saying, you understand that this was premeditated, this was ordered. So it goes from the Hamas leaders all the way down to the civilians who came, and had all the time in the world to do whatever they wanted. Who are we blaming here? And are we blaming the international community for looking away or not calling this out or not recognizing Hamas as a terrorist? I mean, there's so many levels of blaming here. And on the domestic level, the international level, civil, criminal, there's all that. And then the claiming. What? Okay.
Oh, the necklace.
Oh, my necklace. It's an important necklace. And then there's the claiming part. What is our remedy? Where do we get our remedy? Just, rehabilitation of the victims? Is that enough? Economic measures against Hamas and the other organizations? Recognition, historic recognition of, organizations. There's so many sorts of remedies, and we have to choose, and it totally, some of them contradict. For instance, sometimes people tell me after the 47-minute movie or I do briefings about the evidential status of the gender-based violence. And some of you know what kind of footage and pictures I show. It's horrific. And then everybody after I finish, they say, okay, if we only show this to the world, we will shift public opinion. And it sometimes contradicts the victims or the victims' families' interest and their possibility to rehabilitate and take care of themselves and go back, to their lives. So these are, I'd say, like the three levels of the legal issues, but not only, they're moral issues, values, and that contradict them.
It's deeply complicated. Ayelet, thank you. I hope we'll have time to come back for more. Lee, as a journalist, you can highlight important stories to millions of people through your newspaper articles. What made you want to write an entire book about October 7th instead? And how has writing this book impacted your approach to journalism and storytelling? In your reporting, how have you seen the Jewish community respond to incidents of sexual violence in Israel and across the globe? And what role does the media play in shaping public perception?
I started writing the book in the end of October, last October, a time where I was overwhelmed with grief and with anger and with a feeling that I need to do something for these victims. But you ask yourself, what can you do for the dead? And one of the things I could do, and I always did, was to write. I've been a journalist with Haaretz for almost a decade now, and I've always been focused in human stories and the stories of people on the margins of Israeli society. If it's victims of sexual violence, asylum seekers, the LGBTQ community, the elderly. And time and again, I've seen how the stories of these people are not just shaped, but also retold and mistold by the people in power. People who usually don't know a lot of things about these people's lives. And I came to understand that if I truly want to reflect a political reality to my readers, I have to do it from the bottom up. That the real story always lies with the real people. And if you think about what happened since October 8th, we've been flooded with information and misinformation and disinformation about Israel and about the war. But if you think about it, again, we mostly hear from the people, from the top down, from the politicians, from the generals. And yes, sometimes we hear survivors and we hear the hostages' families, but it's usually this brief synopsis about the immediate tragedy that has been depoliticized. And this book was my attempt to reclaim the story of 10/7 and to take it from the people in power and bring it back to the everyday people, to the mothers and fathers and children who lived and died on the Gaza border. and to go beyond statistics and political agendas and give the reader a view from the heart and from the homes of these people. And one of the most important things is that I didn't want to define these people as victims. I didn't want to write a book about death or remember them only for their last moments. I conducted hundreds of these interviews with bereaved families and first responders and their friends, and I investigated their lives and their communities and their beliefs, and I went back to their families' histories, 2 and 3 generations back to where the conflict started. So the personal stories are woven together with the larger political and historical background, and you start to understand how this conflict shaped these people's lives long before 10/7. And you're asking me how it changed my journalism. I mean, before 10/7, I had this thought that I can always keep a boundary between my professional life and the personal life. And 10/7, from the very early hours, it was personal because a lot of my family live in Ofakim. Ofakim is one of these small poor towns close to the Gaza border. Just to give you an understanding, they're suffering from rockets from Hamas since 2001, more than 20 years. But this community is so poor that they can't afford shelters in their homes. So every time there's a rocket attack, people are running for safety to the public shelter. And that morning of 10/7, people didn't know terrorists are in the streets. They thought it was another rocket attack. So people ran out. And 20 Hamas terrorists were waiting for them there. And they killed 49 residents of Ofakim. And my family was only saved because they were lazy. And my uncle was so used to these alarms, he said, well, let's just stay home. Let's not run this time. And this is how they were saved. So it started so personal. And 2 months later, while I was doing an interview with a mother who lost her son and daughter-in-law, I got the news that one of my best friends died in Gaza in a mission to rescue hostages. His name was Gal Eisenkot, and the book is dedicated to Gal's memory. You might know the name because he was the son of Gadi Eisenkot, that was the chief of the IDF and a minister. But Gal was a young man. He was a student. He wanted to be a doctor. He never chose a military path for himself. But when he was called up, like so many others, on 10/7, he went there and he wanted to save hostages and he wanted to do his best. And after losing him, I understood even more why the work I was doing was so important, because when I was reading the articles about Gal, I couldn't recognize my friend in it. It was so filtered by political agendas, by people taking credit and saying who he was, and I couldn't see who my friend, his individuality, his specific personality. And in this book, what I try to do for these families is to remember their loved ones for their lives and for who they were, to keep them alive, at least on paper, on these pages.
Thank you for doing that for each of those families on the behalf of everybody here. Sheila, let me go back to you, because these people in this audience are leaders in their Jewish communities.
Yep.
And I think we need some instruction about how to do the kind of community engagement that you do all day, every day, with the community organizations that have disappointed us, and how to begin those conversations on the local level. I know what you're doing at National Council of Jewish Women, but we're in small towns, intermediate and large, and we need a playbook often about how to make a difference with community organizations that have fallen silent.
Great. Well, first, I'm glad you came back to me because I realized after I was calling and naming some of the amazing Jewish women.
Who'd you forget?
I forgot Daphne. She's sitting right there, but it's because you got to choose the front row. Daphne, Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, is an amazing leader, amazing organization, and we need the Orthodox community as part of this. And the Orthodox community, Orthodox women, often disproportionately impacted by the intersection of gender-based violence and anti-Semitism. They're visibly Jewish in a different way. And it's very important, Daphne's leadership right now, and I'm honored to call you my friend too. So first, we need to lift up women all the time. I should say first, I love telling other people what they should be doing, so thanks. Great question, always bring it to me. A few things. One is our budgets are our moral documents, right? And so before we look at everybody else, we hold up the mirror. If you want to care about women in your community, you need to think about whether or not you're offering benefits that advance women in your own organizations, including paid family leave, period, full stop. Once again, very important. Not every Jewish organization does this, and you need it in order to have women continue to thrive in organizations. Look at how women are paid, look at how women are treated, think about whether you've ever had a woman executive in however many hundreds of years the organization has been around, and continue to elevate more and more and more women's voices. It's important we have opportunities to have our seats at the table. It's not that only hire women, but it's important we lift each other up. I think a few things on sexual violence and the organizations, and then on what you can do in your community right now. So first, this is very important. Navigating sexual violence and navigating what happened from Israel actually requires expertise. And one of the mistakes I've seen that I think it's okay to say here is a lot of organizations that have not consulted rape crisis counselors, that have not actually have lived experience in this area, putting out images, statements, et cetera, as if they know what to do. And it's important because, as I just said, this is actually something that a disproportionate amount of people in our community has experienced, that we're very thoughtful about how we talk about this in a way that doesn't re-traumatize beloved members of our own community. So first and foremost, if you want to get more involved in this issue, which I think you should, and I invite you to, make sure somebody is at the center with actual knowledge and expertise. There's a lot of organizations you can turn to. You should have a local rape crisis center. There's all sorts of social workers probably involved in your local federations and synagogues already. Count on them, ask them, run the language by them. If you're gonna put an image of like bloody sweatpants on Instagram, which I've seen so many of, which can be really, really hard to see, put up an image first on that carousel that says what you're about to see is hard. Let people choose to go into the space knowing what's coming. That's how we honor not just the victims from October 7th, that's how we honor victims of sexual violence among us. And the whole idea, you're talking about trauma and being an advocate for your friend, the path of moving through trauma, it never fully goes away, is about moving from being a victim to being an advocate. It's actually proven that when you start doing things to help other people on what happened to you, that's when you can actually heal in a different way some of the wounds that you have. So you get to help center the right people, make sure you have experts around. You can always come to NCW. We feel like we're a moral authority on this. We helped write the Violence Against Women Act alongside JWI. We're here to be helpful and count on us, call on us. You have to share stories and advocate respectfully, as I said. And I'll say this too, Me Too is a very important hashtag for a lot of people. And there's another group of people that haven't been believed, right? Black women. There's another group of people that haven't been believed. Pretty much all women. There is a myth that women are believed around sexual violence. And if we want to continue to believe Israeli women, we have to believe all women. And so use Me Too, but use it for what it's meant to be also, right? I want to make sure we can still use that. It's helped so many women. So use that hashtag around telling stories. Tell the stories of Israelis and put hashtag Me Too. Let's continue to help be a part of all of our sisterhood across really the world who's experienced sexual violence and calling it out, and be consistent. So, right, we have a lot of people criticizing people not speaking up, but there is sexual violence as a tool of war happening all over the world right now. And I haven't seen the Jewish community talk about it. Yemen, Sudan, Ukraine, within 48 hours, the United Nations called out the sexual violence from Ukraine. What happened in Israel was different. It was systemic and planned and intentional. But sexual violence has always been used as a tool of war on women's bodies, right? Sexual violence has always been used to weaponize women. And so long as women have existed, sexual violence has existed. It doesn't mean we make excuses for it. It means we actually have to talk about it more. So as you know what it feels like to feel the world didn't hear us, let us use that to speak up even more. And for organizations, I just think screen this film with the right people, with trauma counselors, talk about it. It's easier in community. And make sure that you're engaged and having one-on-one conversations and dialogue to say what's coming up for you. What's hard? Why haven't you said anything about this? If you approach a conversation in relationship with somebody, right, not someone who you don't know, but if you're working with a local organization that said nothing and you're feeling hurt, the appropriate thing to do is go to them privately, not on Twitter at first, and to say, ouch. And you hope when you're in a relationship that the other person says, oops, right? We have to first let the people who are gonna say oops say that and tell them and help them do better. And then, if they don't, and if they double down, that happened with us, an organization that was like, nope, right? Rape is resistance. We had that, one organization. And it was really, really, really hard. And it's okay not to work with people who say that. It's okay to have a red line that matters for you. And also in today's ecosystem and coalitions, I just want this really, really known. If you go to any rally in this country on any issue, there is going to be a speaker you disagree with, usually. And so it doesn't mean to pull yourself out and your organization out of the whole thing. It just means we have to flex a muscle of what it means for Jews to show up, because what we learned once again is what it feels like when people don't for us. So we can invite them to do more and we can show up more.
Very wise instructions. Thank you, Sheila. Ayala, let's go back for a second. I know you've spent a lot of time combing through what must be miserable footage of what happened on October 7th. I mean, I can't imagine the toll it's taken on you personally. And I know it's in the hopes of holding Hamas responsible or having the evidence to hold them responsible. First of all, how's that going? And second of all, what do you do in conversation with people who don't believe you?
Well, yeah, what I've been doing since October 7th is collecting the pieces of the puzzle. Like I said, trying to understand what happened there that day. And as I went along, we organized as a group, me and my friends. You saw one of my colleagues, Professor Ruth Halperin Kadari, in the footage that we just saw. And we called ourselves the Dinah group. Dinah is the daughter of Jacob and Leah. She was abducted and raped. It is also the Hebrew word for her justice, hadin shela. And again, I was talking about the naming. This is something all my life I've been doing in parallel things like Sheila. I was in the Rape Crisis Centers. I was in the Authority for the Advancement of Women. I was a prosecutor, criminal prosecutor. But I never come across anything like this. So we started together and still are trying to understand what happened there. Part of what I'm doing is in reserve service. I'm an intelligence officer, and I have access to all materials that authorities have from October 7th. That's what I do in my service. And I go through it and look for indications and evidence for the different manifestations of that kind of violence. And I do that also not in the Army. This is what we do. We talk to survivors, we talk to first responders, to medical and mental health professionals to get as much understanding, again, of what happened that day. And it was, I have to say, there is a very big gap between what is included in the criminal law of Israel, domestic criminal law, and the wider notion of what gender-based violence includes, conflict-related gender-based violence. For instance, and I'm sorry, this is what it is, abusing bodies is not a criminal offense in Israel. Yes, it's not, because it never really happened. So we do need to amend our law, but it's not retroactive, so it's not going to be part of the indictment. I will say that we are working on different legal frameworks that it will be included, in a legally, of course, but as terror, not as a sexual assault. But it is important for me to share with you in general what the evidential status of the gender-based violence on October 7th looks like. In general, again, just a whole brief with footage and everything. Obviously, it's not appropriate in this situation, but there are testimonies. There are testimonies of survivors. There are testimonies of eyewitnesses, a lot of testimonies of eyewitnesses. There's testimonies of first responders that got to the scene, and we call it talking bodies. You see, like was described here, but there's many more. Over and over, the same pattern of how the bodies were found. Naked, fully or partially, tied, gagged, blood in the pelvic area and the behind. You saw that part about where she said the witness talked about the cutting of the breasts that she witnessed. I have to admit, when I heard it at first, it sounded off. It sounded exaggerated. But then, I don't know if you remember, a few days after October 7th, maybe 12, 13, 14, something like that, Secretary Blinken testified about evidence that he was shown of a family that was slaughtered at the breakfast table in a kibbutz. That was in a Nova. This is in a kibbutz. And the family members were mutilated in different ways. And the mother's breast was cut off. So that's in Nova, this is in a kibbutz, and we have more and more like this. And you don't have to be a legal expert to understand. If you see the same pattern, it's premeditated. So, and also just in regard to the testimonies, we have testimonies of medical and mental health professionals that are understanding, even if they didn't present themselves as such, understanding they're treating sexual assault victims. For instance, a doctor who said, she didn't say anything, but when I saw the relief on her face that from the pregnancy test that it was negative, it said it all. So there is a testimonies, there's footage, loads of footage. There's GoPros, there's phones, there's surveillance cameras, there's loads, and that's what I've been doing for the past few months, going through all this and looking for the naked body that was caught on the camera of the ambulance that passed by, and footage, of course, from Gaza. So loads of footage. We're just at the beginning of this. Authorities, IDF, when they go through this footage, they look for hostages, they look for targets, they look for terrorists. They don't look for, they don't have, fortunate for them, they don't have the glasses that I have. And also we have information from terrorists, like you said, like you saw, on the, but that's, it has less weight, I'll say, in the criminal procedure. And forensics, unfortunately, as you know, it was and still is a war zone. So the decision was to evacuate everybody as quickly as possible because, worried parents started coming and there were still terrorists a few days after running around in that area. So it wasn't treated as a crime scene, it was treated as a war zone. They evacuated the bodies. And as Judaism, you have to bury as quickly as possible. So a lot of forensics information was, we don't have it, but still, we have enough. We have enough, and the standard that sometimes I feel like it's like a trap. The standard of the golden evidence is a standard that only we get, Me Too, unless you're a Jew. It's interesting what you said. I have to think of, playing.
Yeah, that's true also.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Nobody questioned the Yazidi women, the Ukrainian women. Nobody. We believe, right? That's what we do. I'm a professional feminist. That's what I call myself. I believe. But we're not. And it also goes to, and I'll finish with that, I was in Canada on something like this also, and a victim came up to me and said, I'm afraid, a victim not of October 7th, and she said, I'm afraid I won't be believed now because Jewish women are not believed. We're not belief-worthy. We're not trustworthy. And we have to take that thought when, working in communities.
Oh gosh, okay. Last question for you. I know you have written these 100 beautiful stories. I imagine they've all been done willingly with the families. Did you have pushback from any families who didn't want their stories told? And are people believing your stories, or are you finding what I hope you have not, which is people not believing the stories that you've put in your book?
I mean, of course, all the interviews I did were with families who accepted. Some other families said, no, it's too early, we can't do it right now. But these families who spoke with me really wanted their children to be remembered, and that was a way to do that. The problem now is that there is this boycott on Israeli writers.
Yeah, right.
That, very much started since 10/7, but in the last few weeks even, with this new open letter, has become more and more, we feel it. I'm now in the US doing this book tour. I'm going, since September, I'm here until February or March to 40 communities. Guess how many of them are not Jewish?
None. I'm afraid you're going to say zero.
Zero, because it's only the Jewish community wanna hear about the stories of 10/7. And again, I'm telling in my book stories of victims who are mostly Jews, but as you said, not just. I'm telling stories of victims from Ukraine who fled the Russian invasion to Ukraine in February of 2022 and came to Israel as a place of refuge, believing they'll start a better life. And then 1 year later, they find themselves fleeing again, this time Hamas rockets on October of 2023. Or I'm writing about the Bedouin community. So many people forget that 22% of Israel are Arab Israelis or Palestinian Israelis. For example, one of the horrible stories that are not told is the story of the youngest victim of this attack. And it starts with a woman named Sujud. Sujud is a Bedouin Israeli Palestinian woman. She's 20 years old. And on the day of 10/7, she was 9 months and 4 days pregnant. And she was on her way to the hospital when Hamas terrorists stopped her on the road. And even though she was visibly wearing a hijab and visibly 9 months pregnant, they shot her twice in her womb. And her little baby suffered the 2 bullets and protected Sujud. And she lived. The baby died in the age of 10 hours. And I know it's a horrible, horrible story. But every time, people are telling me, oh, why are you telling only the stories of Israeli victims? I'm saying, or just the stories of Jews. I'm saying, well, so many of the victims here are Palestinian Israeli, are Ukrainians, are students from Nepal and Thailand who found themselves in Israel 3 weeks before the attack. And we need to tell their stories, and we need to remember everyone. So it's so... this book came out first in Europe, in French and Germany and in Dutch and other languages. And I must tell you, it was easier there. I felt like we could have a dialogue. It was a bestseller the first week. All the big newspaper, not Jewish newspaper, regular newspaper covered it. And they could ask me difficult questions, like what I just asked. And I answered But here in the US, I mean, I'm here only a few months, but it feels like it's only a dialogue we're having in the Jewish community, and it's making me very, very sad.
I understand that. We have a lot of work to do, all of us, and we have 3 incredible warriors who are helping us. So please express your appreciation to these 3 incredible women.
And you.
Thank you all for coming.